The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee held a hearing that cuts to the very heart of what it means to be American. At stake, birthright citizenship, a constitutional right enshrined in the 14th Amendment, born out of the ashes of one of this nation's greatest shames. Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, the subcommittee's ranking Democrat, delivered a striking opening, one that drew a direct line from the Dred Scott decision to the actions of ICE agents operating under this administration. Welch, with his trademark measured tone, laid bare a question this country can no longer afford to ignore.
To do that, I want to recognize the ranking member and my friend of the subcommittee, Senator Peter Welch, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for calling this hearing. And it is at a time where immigration policy is fraught and it's conflicted. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. First of all, our nation was built on immigrants. Our nation was also built on slave labor. And our nation had this Dred Scott decision, which literally said African Americans were not citizens, not entitled to be citizens. And what that wrong was finally righted when that Dred Scott decision was overturned by the constitutional amendment that did establish the right of citizenship by birth. But Mr. Chairman, you say, and I think this is a fair question, does citizenship be conferred just by birth? Legally, most scholars say it is, and I believe it is. But real citizenship is embracing the responsibilities every single one of us has to live up and promote the ideals that every person is created equal and has an opportunity to be their best self and contribute to the betterment of our country. So this argument about what's legal and what isn't, and I believe it's very clear that the law says if you're born here, you are a citizen here. That is just the beginning. It is up to each and every one of us to accept the responsibility we have to create a more perfect union. We're at a fraught time. What we're seeing is a rampage by ICE in the name of so-called protecting our citizens. We've had a debate in this country about open borders, and Mr. Chairman, there's been success in closing the border. A country does have a right to define what its borders are. We've had a debate about deporting criminals. Criminals are being deported. But what we're now seeing is a reckless rampage of mass deportations, and where people who have been here and are working hard in this economy, creating jobs, serving in the military, those people are being picked up by masked agents. And we saw how extreme it is in Minneapolis, where a 37-year-old nurse, a 37-year-old mom of 3 were both shot down without any justification. And this is in the name of a so-called enforcement of citizenship. The constitutional rights that we're talking about at this hearing, they're being violated. They are being violated. And what this hearing has to be about is ensuring that we protect the constitutional rights of people who are entitled to them in this country. One of our witnesses here, Alejandro Barranco, a Marine, 2 brothers, Marines. His father, a landscaper, was arrested with guns drawn, no criminal record, and has not been deported, but that was because he had a status that was being challenged. He was picked up in that way. That is wrong. So what we're talking about here is not just about the legal definition of citizenship, because it's on us to have enforcement mechanisms that work, a judicial system that works, but in the name of like cleaning out everybody who has a questionable status, and you end up 86% of the people who are arrested have no crime at all associated with them. Where this man, Alejandro, and his 2 brothers are Marines and their father is picked up. That is of concern to me, and it's of concern to the American people. The enforcement actions of ICE have been on a rampage. They're trampling on the rights of the people of this country. It's time for us to protect constitutional rights, not violate them. On the question of birthright citizenship, that's illegal, all right? That is illegal. So there's a lot of room here for people who are concerned about the border and concerned about the future of our country and concerned about the responsibility that anybody has who's here to contribute to creating a more perfect union. There is opportunity for us to work together, but we will not, I will not submit that an executive order by a president can overturn a Supreme Court decision. I yield back.
Thank you, and I want to...
Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, a seasoned legislator who has spent decades navigating the intersection of law and conscience, did something remarkable today. He didn't just argue the Constitution. He narrated the American story from the original sin of slavery, through the moral catastrophe of Dred Scott, to the hard-won redemption of the 14th Amendment, and then held up a mirror to the present, and what that mirror reflected was deeply uncomfortable. The 14th Amendment was not a suggestion. It was not aspirational language. It was a constitutional correction written in the blood of a civil war, ratified to ensure that no government, no president, no executive order could ever again strip personhood from people born on American soil. And yet, here we are in 2025, relitigating a question that was settled in 1868. Welch's invocation of Alejandro Barranco should give every American pause regardless of party. Here is a man whose family gave this country what very few families can claim: 3 sons in the United States Marine Corps. 3 sons who raised their right hand and swore to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And their father, a landscaper, a working man, a man with no criminal record, was met not with gratitude, but with drawn weapons and the cold machinery of deportation. If that doesn't disturb you, I would respectfully suggest that the problem is no longer at the border, it's in the mirror. And then there is Minneapolis, a 37-year-old nurse, a 37-year-old mother of 3, shot, not in a war zone, not in a standoff with armed criminals. In an American city, by agents of the American government, in the name of American law. Senator Welch called it what it is: unjustified. It is the kind of story that, if it came from another country, we would cite as evidence of authoritarianism, but it's happening here, under this flag, under this administration. The statistic Welch cited deserves to sit with you tonight: 86%. 86% of the people swept up in these ICE operations have no criminal record whatsoever, not a misdemeanor, not a traffic violation, nothing. These are not the dangerous criminals the administration promised to remove. These are workers, parents, neighbors, taxpayers, people who wake up every morning and contribute to the economy that the rest of us depend on, and they are being treated as enemies of the state. A nation has the right to secure its borders. A nation has the right to enforce its laws. No serious person disputes that. But there is a vast and dangerous distance between border security and what we are witnessing now, which is the weaponization of federal law enforcement against the very people the Constitution was amended to protect. And let us not lose sight of the constitutional question at the center of today's hearing. Birthright citizenship is not a loophole. It is not an administrative error. It is the law of the land affirmed by the Supreme Court, grounded in the plain text of the 14th Amendment, and supported by the overwhelming consensus of constitutional scholars across the political spectrum. The notion that a president, any president, can nullify that right with the stroke of a pen is not just legally dubious. It is a direct challenge to the separation of powers, to judicial authority, and to the constitutional order itself. Senator Welch closed with a line that I think will echo well beyond that hearing room. He will not submit to the idea that an executive order can overturn a Supreme Court decision. That is not partisanship. That is constitutional literacy. And it is exactly the kind of clarity that this moment demands. Because here is the truth that today's hearing laid bare. The debate is no longer about immigration policy. It is about whether the Constitution of the United States still means what it says, whether the rights it guarantees are universal or conditional, whether the rule of law applies to everyone or only to those the current administration finds convenient. The 14th Amendment was written for moments exactly like this one. The question is whether we still have the courage to honor it.